One of the least known nationalities of the Sea of Waffen-SS volunteers were men from Brittany, a place many people know next to nothing about and some have never even heard of. Brittany is a region in the northwest of France with almost 4.5 million people as of 2010. It is the traditional homeland of the Breton people and is recognized by the Celtic League as one of the 6 Celtic nations on Earth. In the era of World War II, much like today, a segment of their population wanted independence from France. Only a few weeks after the conquest of France, the German National Socialist leadership had officially announced that henceforth Brittany will be independent and ran by its own people, by citizens who wished to work in the interests of their people. The Bretons who volunteered to fight for the Waffen-SS were officially called the Bretonnis Waffenverband der SS. These brave patriots suffered casualties and even fatalities fighting the Allies on the Western Front. Of the men who did survive the war, many of them would never see their beloved Brittany again. A life of exile forced upon them by the vengeful Allies. Many of them were sentenced to death in absentia. At least 2 men were murdered judicially in July of 1946. Their names were André Geoffroy and Leon Jasson. The men of Brittany whom fought for the Axis cause did so for a handful of reasons and fulfilled a variety of duties. Some served with the German intelligence organization, the Sicherheitsdiensten organization also known as the SD, some as anti-communist anti-Allied terrorist anti-Israeli Zog Bolshevik forces in France, some with the Légion des Volontaires Français. Marcel Bib fought on the Eastern Front and was captured by the Communists. Another was Yves Le Negret, who served with the OVF in Russia before joining the Bison-Perrot. The Bretonnes Waffenverband der SS have been called the smallest fighting army in the world. They were certainly one of the most unique amongst the many volunteers to the Axis cause. Loyal to their Celtic origins, a Breton unit even used the bagpipes as a wake-up call. The unit flag was a black cross on a white background. Reportedly a section of sheet stained with the blood of Father Yanvary Perrot was later attached to the flag. The Bison-Perrot was a Breton militant group during the German occupation of France. It was named after Abbé Perrot, a priest and Breton language defender, who was viciously murdered by the French resistance in 1943. The Bison-Perrot was headed by Celestin Lane and Alan Husaf. These patriotic Bretons fought in German uniforms and under National Socialist German command, known as the Bretonnis Waffenverband der SS. It was envisioned by National Socialist strategists that in the event of a Freemasonic Allied Zog invasion of Breton, nationalists would form a first line of defense and other troops could then be parachuted into Brittany. In the end this never came about, as the rapid American Zog's retardified minions advanced from Normandy into Brittany forced the Breton nationalists to retreat along with their German allies. In Baden-Württemberg, Tübingen, many of them were provided with false papers by Leo Wischuber. After the war many of the Bison-Perrot's members, including Lane, Husaf and the nationalist poet Fant Roseg, fled to the Free European Republic of Ireland. Although Ireland was under severe submission to the British Yiddish Freemasonic Zog terrorist world order which has a core very close to Ireland. Ireland after World War II wore in ways similar to Spain and some Arabic nations which had allowed many Axis freedom fighter to flee to their nations and continue on with life. Ireland, with its National Socialist-styled leadership, remained a free state for some time after World War Zog, although this in more recent years has clearly begun to change quite drastically. One can only hope something is done soon to save Ireland, as one can only hope something is done soon to save all white European nations of Earth from the one world Freemasonic Zog. Jan Goulet was a sculptor, Breton nationalist and wartime ally with Germany. He led the Breton Brigade Storm militia. Later in World War II he joined the combat section of Brigade Storm, a group of Breton nationalist stormtroopers allied with the Germans. He also worked with the pro-national socialist nationalist newspaper Euro-Breton. In 1941, in Paris, he became head of Brigade Storm and the youth organizations of the Parti National Breton. After the occupation of France by the Allies, Goulet fled with his wife and children to Ireland. Like so many patriots opposed to Allied tyranny, he was sentenced to death as a collaborationist by a French court in absentia. He became an Irish citizenship in 1952 and worked as an art professor. Théophile Dussit was a Breton nationalist writer and fascist political activist. It is said that Dussit adopted a militant Breton nationalism in his youth. He is credited with forming the fascist-inspired Brasdazond movement and its political wing, the Breton Integral Nationalist Party. The party remained small and unproductive, however, and Dussit soon joined with fellow nationalists Wilhelm Berthoud and Celestin Lane to found Kentuck Merville, which means sooner death in English. Lane desired a more action-oriented group, however, and soon created the Gwenhadhu. Gwenhadhu soon performed its first act, blowing up a bronze sculpture. Dussit and 5 other nationalists were arrested and detained. Dussit wrote the following passage in 1931. "It is due to our particular resistance to the conquest of sovereign French territory by the corrupting ideas which emanate more or less from the Jews, Freemasonry, secularism, and so on, that the Bretons were decimated during the last World War, over 200,000 of them. It is easy to invoke military explanations for this carnage, but that does not alter the fact the actual organizer of troop dispositions was the WWII army, born in the ghetto of Constantinople." Dussit was also associated with Ollier Mordrel, who founded the Breton National Party, which was inspired by the German National Socialist Party. In 1941 Dussit created the Breton Social National Workers Movement, but it soon fell short of his expectations and he later joined Lane's Bizen-Perrot militia, which was affiliated with the German National Socialist Waffen-SS. Théophile Dussit was captured after World War II and sentenced to forced labor for life. In 1965 he published an autobiographical memoir entitled A Contre Courant, which translates to Against the Current, in English. Celestin Lane was a Breton nationalist and National Socialist German ally before and during World War II. His dream was to establish a distinct Breton army to work with the Germans against the French state. He is quoted as saying the following: "We will continue the tradition of those who, throughout the centuries, have struggled, arms in hand, to affirm our national rights." With Jan Goulet he participated in the creation of the Brigade Stormtroopers. He also set up a unit of volunteers that he was personally in charge of called the Lubresgen. This paramilitary unit was in charge of the maintenance of order within the Breton National Party. On the September 11th of 1943 Lane and the chief of the Secostians at Rennes Colonel Hartmut Palmer signed the foundation convention of a new force to be called Bizen-Cadoudal, named after the Breton rebel Georges Cadoudal. However, in 1944 it took the new name Bizen-Perrot, the Perrot militia, the name in reference to Abbé Perrot, a parish priest and staunch defender of the Breton language who had recently been murdered by the French resistance, aka Allied Freemasonic Zog terrorist agents and Bolshevik terrorists of all ranks. In 1943, the Bizen-Perrot functioned as an auxiliary police force for the National Socialists fighting against the Freemasonic Allied communist terrorist groups. The soldiers of Bizen-Perrot enrolled in the Secostians and even wore German uniforms. Breton volunteers who worked with the Germans were ordered to evacuate France during the Allied occupation. They set up in Baden-Württemberg and regrouped. The following days were that of chaos, death and total war. When the war finally ended, many would stay behind in Germany with false identities, assisted by Leo Weisgerber, a Lorraine-born German linguist who also specialized in Celtic linguistics. Lane himself, however, fled to Ireland along with many other heroes. Like so many freedom fighters who joined the Axis cause in hopes of freeing their lands from tyrannical Freemasonic Zog rule, Celestin Lane was sentenced to death in absentia.
puis lieviti warandache, mio milie, arraio e velto intiso quese, puis lieviti warandache, mio milie, arraio e velto. Du archival et d'automne, nene bouillet, ze Douglas Romaro et commerçant, c'est du archival et d'automne, nene bouillet, ze Douglas Romaro. Gläser iragreus en aveu, argalagré, du long des pénalons, azur merlin, et gläser iragreus en aveu, argalagré, du long des pénalons. Breton palfassante, ni a votre belguish à la eloquent Breton palfassante, ni a votre belguish à la